The referendum on whether we stay or leave the EU could be as early as June or July. David Cameron's using his trip to Davos this week to lobby European leaders for the reforms he needs to convince voters we're better off in than out. There's a lot at stake, especially for London. So, here to discuss the arguments that are likely to dominate politics in the coming months are Labour's Kate Hoey, who we heard from earlier, Mark Field, the Conservative MP for the City and Westminster, Baroness Bowles, a former Liberal Democrat MEP, and Suzanne Evans, UKIP's Deputy Chairman. Welcome, all of you. Kate, first of all, you've portrayed this as a battle between the establishment and the people. If that's the case, the people are going to lose, aren't they?
No, the people are going to win, and of course for the first time many of us are having our say on the changed European Union from what people originally thought they were in back in 1975. So it's a great victory to get the referendum, and now we're going to have the debate. And what we're finding, certainly in Labour, because Labour is, I mean, there's no doubt about it, my group would be a minority within the parliamentary Labour Party, but in the country we're finding now, since we've been going a little while and launched officially this week, that councillors, backbenchers, people all over the country, particularly Labour supporters who had gone to UKIP on this issue, are now beginning to say, look, Labour has to reconnect. Jeremy Corbyn wants to reconnect with voters. This is the issue that we can really get back our support in Labour heartlands. Mark, if Kate's right and the people have decided that, what's the case for staying?
Oh, I think there's a very strong case for staying. I mean, I think that David Cameron is going to get a quite substantial package, more than even I would have thought possible 6 or 9 months ago. And I think there's a real sense, particularly since the atrocities in Paris, that there's a real solidarity about issues around security as well as the economic arguments, which I accept the economic arguments are not as much of a slam dunk as seemed to be the case 40 years ago when we voted to stay in the EEC. But I still think that it is overwhelming in the national interest of this country that we remain members of the European Union.
Suzanne, you heard what Kate said. You presumably and usually agree with a Labour politician about this being the people versus the establishment.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the people, as Kate said, were duped back in 1975, or well, before that, when we actually went in. You know, we've never had a vote to join the European Union. We've only ever been asked whether or not we want to stay. We were told it was a common market. It's quite clearly gone well beyond that. We've signed away our sovereignty. We've signed away the right of the members of Parliament that we put into power to make our own laws. We've handed power over to an unelected civil service who we don't know, can't elect, can't vote out if they make a mistake. Immigration, a massive issue that Mark's alluded to. I actually take a very different view to Mark on this. I think that what we've seen on our television screens is actually making the case for leaving the European Union. We've seen how the free movement of people across borders is actually letting terrorists into Europe and eventually into the United Kingdom as well. So I take a very different view. I think for the sake of our national security, we actually need to leave.
Can I just ask Sharon, you heard what Suzanne said there. Were we duped?
No, I don't think we're duped at all. Europe has obviously changed in what it is, and also the development of the Eurozone and banking union and things like that means that there have been some issues to address, and to address in a sort of global package rather than, you know, doing it issue by issue, directive by directive, which is something that I have had to do. But I must challenge Suzanne. I mean, to think that the Commission does everything is absolutely wrong. I mean, what do they think that we do in the Parliament and in the Council of Ministers? An awful lot, because you're not. Never pull your weight, and you're never there to vote.
The whole part of the European Union is in a non-elected commission. We can't get rid of it. And as Tony Benn once said, you know, the people who actually, if you can't get rid of people in an institution, then it is not democratic, and it is the most undemocratic institution there is. And the idea, by the way, I do wish the people who want to stay would stop talking about Europe. Europe is a much bigger area. I love Europe. We're not anti-Europe. We're anti the European Union. No, Mark,
you're presumably a supporter of democracy, and if the argument that it's undemocratic and hard to argue against.
In fairness, we do live under a monarchy, and that's not democratic, and I think that's got overwhelming support.
So you're suggesting a referendum about monarchy as well?
I'm not suggesting that for a minute. Listen, but I think it's worth pointing out this whole issue in relation to migration. Of course, it's an incredible worry, and I well understand why many Britons feel very concerned about it. But let's face some facts. the fact that we're in the European Union means there is at least some fraternity between us and France on this matter. I think if we left the European Union, the migration crisis, which is actually a crisis of the globalisation rather than one specifically to the European Union, is one that would become much more profound here in the UK. Essentially, you know, we are spending £7 million of our money to have a centre in Calais. The French are holding the line at Calais. There are large numbers of migrants there who would like to come to the UK. They speak a smattering of English. If we left the EU, the French would turn. Kate, if we left the EU, the richest people would be people traffickers who would be on the English Channel, and there would be vast numbers of migrants coming to our shores.
Factually, it is not because of the EU that the French have got the borders at Calais.
But Suzanne, you would argue that if we left the EU, the borders would be stronger.
Well, absolutely, because then we can police our own borders. We can start to check who we let into the United Kingdom, as opposed to just having to let anyone in with a European Union passport, whether they be someone who's coming here to beg on our streets or whether they're someone coming here with criminal intent. We don't have that right now. And the refugees at Angela... Can I just finish? The refugees that Angela Merkel is taking into Germany, some of whom have turned out quite clearly not to be very nice people. 3 years' time, they'll have a German passport. They can come straight to England.
But
no
already
questions
now,
asked.
you talk about controlling our borders. We don't know how many illegal immigrants have come into this country in the last 15 to 20 years.
Well, that's not because of the European Union, Mark. That's because of the lack of the will on the part of your government.
There are huge numbers of migrants coming from outside the European Union as well.
You've been an MEP, you've been right at the heart of Europe. Do you feel that the campaign to stay in is on the back foot, that you're the underdogs in this?
No, I think that there is a lot of people who would like to know more about Europe, and they would hope that they would get
EU. Once again, it's constant Europe.
I was asked about this, but about the EU, I think that they would quite like to know a lot more about how it works, and a lot more about the positive things that Europe has brought us. Most of the things to do with better time for workers, better holidays, maternity rights, paternity rights. And I know some businesses may not have liked these, but I think most of the people out there...
Can I just bring this to London, though, Kate? Because this is really important, though.
No, it is.
We know that London relies heavily on an income of new, fresh, skilled workers. You would argue that the city needs to stay in Europe. How do you counter that argument?
Well, my point is that there's a very left-wing argument about why we should leave the EU. The idea that it's the European Union that has brought us all these social benefits and trade union rights, when we have seen recently what is happening in terms of Greece and the way that workers have been totally unprotected there, collective bargaining stopped. You know, the idea that somehow the EU is a project about giving people more rights. It's about global corporations. It's about actually bringing in TTIP, with the transatlantic trade, which could mean that our National Health Service be privatised. There's some really strong arguments from the left, which is why it's very interesting, because on the Leave campaign we have people from the right arguing things that I may not necessarily agree with. I would be arguing things that perhaps Suzanne wouldn't necessarily agree with. And it's actually so important that everyone who has a different view about this gets their view across.
You share a different opinion to Suzanne on immigration, presumably.
I actually want to see a fair immigration system. I have a lot of people in my constituency, Afro-Caribbean people, who can find it very difficult to get their relatives in to this country. People from India, people from Australia, our Commonwealth, which we've done down so badly.
Well,
and yet people from Bulgaria or Romania who have no links with this country get priority, and that's what I want. I want to see a fair immigration system. No one wants to stop immigration.
Mark, you heard Boris Johnson there saying that it doesn't make a difference to the city.
I didn't quite say that, actually, and listen, I also think it's very important that we're not hysterical about this argument. Of course, this is a very successful country. If we leave the EU, we will find a way to make it work. But I do think there is more of a risk to the city, and partly there's a lot of euro-denominated business that I think if we left very quickly would not come to these shores. I think also it would mean we would become, as a city, very much an offshore centre, and as a result probably some more nefarious money and potentially reputational damage in the longer term. But no, the city will be a big financial centre. It will be a successful financial centre, whether we're in the EU or not. I just happen to think it would be rather better if we stayed in.
Suzanne, can I just ask you a question about London in particular? You're involved in UKIP's mayoral campaign, drawing up the manifesto. You're a candidate for the London Assembly. Is Europe going to play any role in that campaign?
Well, absolutely, because
Should it?
like anything else, you know, the immigration issue is very much feeding into the pressures that London faces with regard to housing, school places, you know, health services and so on and so forth, our water supply, our transport network. So the fact that we can't control immigration, and London is of course one of the beacons for immigrants coming in, that's exactly where most of them want to be. So it's actually in a sense underpins the whole of our London campaign, that particular issue. But you know, Mark's talking about in or out of London for the city. The fact is, if we stay in, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what new legislation the European Union is going to bring
forward. We don't know
forward.
whether
We're not
if
the
we come out, we
status
don't know
quo.
that, do we?
Well,
to be
we
fair.
actually know. Well, at least we can lobby our members of Parliament. We can make our own laws again. We are not voting for the status quo. We are voting to go full headlong into.
It's about democracy. It's about
exactly.
basic
But here's
democracy.
the thing, Kate.
The right to
Can I just ask you,
control
Kate,
our
one
own
final
country.
question? Do you enjoy being bedfellows with Suzanne?
Well,
I certainly enjoy being bedfellows with Kate. It's lovely to actually be
I
part
think
of
it's
the
great
cross-party
to have.
I'm
campaign.
afraid
I think the public,
time has defeated us. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank all of you for coming in tonight, and also to Keir Starmer.